Good morning. It's good to see you again, by the way. Um, Congratulations on being here and you're winning the state competition. My name's Lindsay Draper. Um, well, I, I won't tell you my history of being from Alabama. You don't have to listen to it again. Um, but I am retired from the juvenile court bench here in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. And my colleagues are.
I am Bob Allison. I teach history at Suffolk University in Boston.
I'm Jack Barlow. I teach politics at Juniata College in Pennsylvania.
And could I impose on you to introduce yourselves and Ms. Maddox?
Hello, my name is Ali Wadarama, and I'll be attending Indiana University, majoring in economics.
Hello, my name is Rob Garrett. I'll be attending Auburn University next year, studying political science.
Hi, my name is Anushka Patel. I'll be attending the University of Alabama at Birmingham, majoring in neuroscience as a precursor to medical school. Our teacher is Miss Amy Maddox, and we're very excited to be here today.
Well, we are excited to have you here. So obviously, you know, it's the second of the Unit 2 questions that we're going to be doing. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? Begin.
Thank you. As Pennsylvania delegate James Wilson once said, "The legislature ought to be a faithful echo of the voices of the people." After the Revolutionary War, which started based on the principle of no taxation without representation, the Founding Fathers knew it was crucial to ensure that the voices of the people were heard. We assert that our representatives should act as delegates and be a reflection of our interests and values, but we also understand that they should have flexibility to make complex decisions. American lawmakers should act as delegates and reflect the preferences of their constituents. For delegated representation to thrive, representatives must understand that they serve as delegates. And secondly, constituents must provide consistent cues in regards to their district's preferences. Without one or the other, the whole system falls apart.
Due to the wide range of representative options, the Founding Fathers proposed several systems at the Philadelphia Convention of 1788. Firstly, the Virginia Plan, written by James Madison and proposed by Edmund Randolph, consisted of a bicameral legislature with proportional representation, which was radically different from the Articles of Confederation. Representatives in the lower house, apportioned by population, would be chosen by popular election in their respective states. The lower chamber would then elect members of the upper chamber. The Virginia Plan thus supported proportional representation and served as a starting point for the structure of representation in the Philadelphia Convention.
Next, William Patterson countered with the New Jersey Plan, which proposed a unicameral legislature with equal state votes similar to the Articles of Confederation. To differentiate itself from the existing articles, the New Jersey Plan also empowered the federal government to regulate commerce and collect taxes. Delegates extensively debated these plans, culminating in the Connecticut Compromise, which provided for a Senate with equal votes by state and a House of Representatives which would be apportioned by population.
However, other plans were discussed at the Constitutional Convention that were not incorporated into the final draft. For example, Alexander Hamilton was dissatisfied with both the Virginia and New Jersey plans, so he presented his own plan to the convention. His plan largely focused on removing most state sovereignty and showcased a bicameral legislature with a lower house and an upper house. His plan was largely cast aside because of its similarities to the British system.
With the hyperpolarization of our current political climate, increasing cynicism, and growing distrust in political candidates, some academics are calling for political reforms similar to those from the progressive era in order to revitalize both elections and representation. Multi-member districts, for example, would decide seats by the proportion of votes won by each party to solve the flaws of a single-member district.
The use of multi-member districts could greatly reduce partisan gerrymandering. With a multi-seat district that is proportionally elected, the lines drawn for districts would have no significant effect on representation. Additionally, the score then automatic runoff or star voting system proposes as another reform method to combat our current representative and electoral issues. In this reform, the voting body is asked to rank candidates based on a scale of 1 to 5. This method better represents voter preference as it takes into the account the varying levels of preference a single voter may have.
According to Harvard statistician Dr. Jameson Quinn, star voting has a voter satisfaction efficiency of more than 90%. We feel that the combination of multi-member districts and star voting methods possesses the best opportunity for expanding representation on an equal basis and allowing our representatives to better reflect the interests of the American people. Thank you. We are ready for your questions.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to talk just a bit about your concept or the ideas on the hyperpolarization. One of the things that I've always felt is that I want representatives, I want leaders, frankly, who are better than I am, who think things through, who don't respond emotionally, who weigh the ideas of my neighbors and the neighbors in the other part of the community. How do we go about getting that to happen?
Yeah, that was a great concern for the founders as well. And as Washington puts it with his saucer senatorial analogy, he intended for the House of Representatives to be where the voices of the people were heard and amplified, in the Senate where those bills could cool down and pass through those Madisonian filters in order to hear the people who were more capable of making those complex decisions.
And speaking largely about our idea of delegated representation, we find it very important to believe that our delegates are very consistent and really consider the ideas of their constituents and the way that their specific preferences are. One such example in making sure that that occurs is having a way in which your constituents can communicate with your delegates. For example, in Alabama for our District 7, Representative Terry Sewell on her website has a way in which you can communicate with her, either requesting a meeting or adding a specific sense of comments about a specific issue that she might support or disagree with. So I think that having those sort of facets and outlets in which your constituents can really communicate with you would serve as potential better ways in which that we can make sure that delegated representation can thrive.
Okay, thank you.
Going back to that question, I think adding to what Anushka said, although I do agree that it's important for representatives to hear us, I also agree that the Senate should be where representatives better take a weight on or the decisions being made. And that's why we have the Senate, which is really important. And as well, we should add requirements for representatives, such as a civics test.
And as for hyperpolarization, there are current reform methods like citizens' assemblies used in Ireland that have people actually coming together to kind of buffer the divide between the two parties.
One real curious thing we see every 2 years is that Congress is rated very low in public opinion polls, what people think of Congress, and yet people reelect their own congressman. I mean, you just spoke about Representative Sewell, and so how is it that we think badly of Congress as a whole, but we keep electing our own member of it?
I think a big part of that is that, or lack of civics. Most people don't even know who the representatives are, much less what the options are in the ballot. So I think that, for example, programs such as We the People inside high schoolers to learn about civics. However, this program, which we're very fortunate to be a part of, it's very limited. So I think that if we implement civics education in high schools, citizens would be more engaged with their government and would be more aware of who their candidates and representatives are.
And especially, I think, when we consider Congress as a whole, I think really looking at the hyperpartisanship that we see in Congress and that sort of standstill that we are at. So I think really I agree with what Ali is saying, in that our people that are electing these representatives and having these sort of ideals should be very much educated, especially with these sort of incorporation of the civics programs.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the job of education to kind of put forward citizens that know about their government and are informed well enough to choose who they're voting for. Because as of now, I believe there is over 50% of people that don't know the three branches of government or are unwilling to kind of learn about the three branches.
Thank
So
you.
let me ask you this: if you were to send your email to Representative Sewell, it might get some attention. But if you sent your email and you sent $5,000, it would get a lot more attention, right? So how do we modify the campaign finance, or do we modify the campaign finance system in order to get money out of politics so that money isn't the thing that's driving the whole boat?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, it's very unlikely that that email might get attention if it's only one email. As we know, on average, a representative asks for 750,000 people currently as it stands now. And I think that one of the biggest legislative pieces of legislation that's passing right now is HR 1, which aims to change the way money works in politics.
And kind of speaking more about HR 1. So HR 1 is very much composed of a variety of different things: expanding voting rights, limiting partisan gerrymandering, and also having this idea of campaign financing. So I think especially with this sort of legislation, we see that it's in the House currently, and we see that it could possibly going to the Senate. And I think that idea of this legislation is something that's on the mind of a variety of different people. But I think if we really want to consider this idea of the hyperpartisanship that we see in Congress, one way, I think Ali mentioned this earlier, having 750,000 people for one representative, I think that's a very high number. So if we really wanted to consider a sense of reform, possibly increasing the size of the House and really making sure that our districts are very much representative. And if we really want to add a sense of data, we can see that in Montana, for 1 million people, there's only one representative. But in Rhode Island, for 525,000 people, there are two representatives. So seeing that differentiation is something why increasing the size of the House might be our best possible way in which to limit that sort of hyperpartisanship and make sure that the voices of the American people are heard.
So the multi-member districts, or the increasing the size of the House, how many people are you talking about? And specifically where I'm going with this is, I'm of the impression that the more people you put in there, the less likely we are to get anything done. How big a group are you talking about?
There was actually a study done by the Time magazine that kind of addressed this sort of consideration and this notion of the increased size of the House. So what they saw was that increasing the size of the House all the way to 930 people and being able to consider this. And I think that if we really, they also mentioned the idea of Madison bringing up a constitutional amendment during the founding era, considering about how capping the district size at 50,000. So I think that increasing the size of the House would lead to a greater amount of representation that we'll be able to see with the American people.
Yeah, and adding on to what Anisha said about it would be more voices to filter out. However, I think that introducing third-party platform, for example, with multi-member districts or ranked voting systems, I think in that way people will be more enticed to vote for a third-party system. And in this case, parties will be more likely to act in coalitions in order for legislation to be passed.
Time.
As we can see. Thank you.
Well, I enjoyed your presentation. I very much like the ideas that you have tendered. Think that you have thought through. You know, it was really weird. I think this was the first time I've heard Ireland brought up. But you all brought through a number of different ideas. One of the really nice things where people start with the very beginnings of the idea and talk to me about James Wilson, and then talk to me about where we just don't seem to not only get anything accomplished, but we don't seem to even want to talk to each other. That there are some people who give hope that we can maybe do this better. I like the fact, and I'm going to end on this one because I need to let other people talk. You all impressed me by recognizing that there are incredible advantages to programs like We the People, but you all are one of the few schools that I've ever heard say, and by the way, we realize that not everybody has access to this program, and that we need to be sure that what we have benefited from is made available to people who don't have some of what we have. And I have to tell you, you have no idea how much I got really happy heart when you did that. Anyway, thank you very much. You've done a wonderful job, and be sure that your teacher and all the people working with you all don't ever forget how much you appreciate their work.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
And I agree with Judge Draper. I really appreciated that. And the fact that in the answering our questions, you actually answered other questions we had on our list to ask, bringing things up that we had hoped to. And you know, your discussion of the framing of the Constitution was very good. You know, mentioning James Wilson, the Hamilton Plan, the range of options. And then when we get to the present day, I would be very cautious about taking political advice from academics. And by the way, I have a whole lecture I can give about why you should never vote for a college professor. Professor Barlow accepted if he ever deigns to run, but you know, Madison was a practical politician, as well as someone who studied the workings of politics with a small p. But we academics are not the best people to tell you how to go about running your life or your country. I think the running of the country is in much better hands with you three. And so I do look forward to your continuing contribution to this civic discussion and to civic life. So thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
One of the people who impacted my life actually was a professor of mine who later ran for and won a Senate seat. And frankly, he was a much better senator than he was a college professor, I will say. Paul Wellstone was his name. And now I forgot everything else I was going to say. You guys did a nice job. I mean, it's clear, right, that you not only sort of have a script in your minds, and you have looked at Federalist 10, you've memorized some key phrases from there, but you've gone well beyond that. And you know some different, the different arguments that were being proposed at the Constitutional Convention and how they were resolved and sort of how they worked themselves out in the course of American history. And so I think that, you know, when you talk about progressive era reforms, for example, right, you have a clear understanding that what the objectives were and why those objectives were held at the time. So that was good. And we could have talked a lot more about all of that, and about campaign finance, about multi-member districts, how that would work, right? Which, by the way, I mean, the Constitution is okay with that, right? There's no constitutional bar on, or there's no constitutional favoritism for single member districts. So we wouldn't even have to change anything. We might have to give Montana and Wyoming more representatives, but, you know, small price to pay, right? But you guys, I mean, what's so nice about this is you were clearly having a conversation, right? You were not sort of straining your brains to find historical notes or antecedents or quotes or any of that stuff. It felt very natural. And that's the objective of this program. That's what we're trying to do. And that's what we're hoping becomes normal in your life. That you're going to be talking about this, whether you're in Indiana or whether you're at University of Alabama, Birmingham, or at Auburn. So I knew if we heard Auburn, we were going to hear somebody who was University of Alabama. I just had this feeling that was going to happen. Anyway, it was a very good discussion. I appreciate it. I hope you don't stop. And by all means, thank Ms. Maddox, thank your coaches, thank your other teachers, because they have made it possible for you to be where you are today. So thank you all, and it's been fun.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. We really
Thank you,
appreciate your
guys.
time.
We appreciate your time. Yes, sir.